Part 1. The Beginning. When I close my eyes and try to remember the first moment I saw him, I realize it was not a single glance, but a gentle unfolding of time. It was late spring, the kind of evening when the air carries the perfume of blossoming trees, and the world feels almost fragile. The golden light of the sun touched the rooftops, and everything seemed to glow softly, as if wrapped in a veil of warmth. I had been walking through the quiet streets of the old town, carrying a book pressed against my chest. I liked walking there because the houses whispered stories through their walls, and the cobblestones seemed to remember every step. My heart that evening was heavy with thoughts I could not name. And then suddenly, there he was. He stood by the fountain in the square, leaning slightly against the stone edge, as if he belonged there, as if the water itself had called him to wait. He was not extraordinary in the way people often imagine love to arrive. There were no fireworks, no sudden bursts of music in the air. Instead, there was calmness, like a breath I had been holding for too long, finally released. Our eyes met only for a second, but in that second I felt something ancient, something that did not belong to the fleeting world of days and nights. His gaze was steady and yet kind, like he had known me before, long before this life, perhaps in another one. I kept walking, pretending not to notice how my pulse had quickened, pretending not to wonder why his presence seemed to shift the entire shape of the evening. Still, as I reached the corner of the street and turned away, I felt it, a thread, invisible but strong, tying me to him. That night, when I lay down to sleep, I could not rest. The image of him lingered behind my closed eyes, and the silence of the room was filled with the echo of that brief, impossible connection. I told myself it was nothing, just a stranger, just a moment. But deep inside I already knew. Some meetings are not accidents. Some meetings carry the weight of destiny. And so it began. Part 2. The second meeting. Days passed, but the memory of him stayed with me, as quietly as a candle still burning long after everyone has left the room. I tried to forget. I truly did. I filled my hours with reading, with the comfort of familiar streets, with the gentle routine of life. Yet, no matter how much I tried, I found myself listening for echoes of footsteps that did not belong to anyone I knew. It was on a rainy afternoon when fate chose to speak again. The sky had darkened, heavy with clouds, and the first drops began to fall as I hurried through the marketplace, searching for shelter. People rushed past me, their umbrellas blooming like dark flowers, and I felt small among them, almost invisible. And then, there he was. He appeared as though the rain itself had guided me to him. He stood under the wide awning of a quiet cafe, watching the world with patient eyes. When he noticed me, his expression softened into something I still struggled to describe. It was not surprise, not exactly. It was recognition, as though he had been waiting. He stepped forward without hesitation, holding his umbrella out toward me. "You'll get soaked," he said gently, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who was not afraid of kindness. I hesitated, but then accepted, stepping under the shared circle of protection. The world outside was blurred by rain, and inside that small space of closeness, the air felt warmer, safer. We stood in silence for a while, and silence had never felt so full. Finally, he smiled as if breaking a spell. "Do you often walk these streets?" he asked. I nodded. "Almost every day. They feel like home." He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Then perhaps it is no accident I saw you again. I walk here too, always looking for something, though I never knew what. The way he looked at me then, steady, unhurried, yet searching, made me feel as though the rain outside was only a curtain, and behind it, the world was waiting to change. When the clouds finally began to part and the rain eased into silence, we walked together, speaking little, listening more. Every step felt delicate, as though we were not just walking through streets, but through the fragile beginnings of something larger than ourselves. By the time we reached the edge of the square, the sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the wet stones with golden light. He stopped and turned toward me. "My name is Adrian," he said quietly, and in that simple moment, with his name hanging in the air, I felt the truth settle deep inside me. This was not just a chance encounter. It was a story that had already begun long before I had the words to tell it. Part 3. Nights of Quiet Words. After that afternoon in the rain, Adrian and I began to meet more often, though never by arrangement. It was as though the city itself carried us toward each other, weaving our paths together like threads in a tapestry. Some evenings I would walk without expectation, only to find him leaning against a familiar wall, waiting without impatience. Other times I would turn a corner, and there he was, his smile lifting the weight of the day from my shoulders. We started to speak more, not with hurried words, but with the kind of slowness that lets silence breathe between sentences. He told me about the books he loved, about the music that seemed to follow him from place to place, soft melodies that reminded him of forgotten summers. I told him about the way I sometimes wrote letters I never sent, letters to the universe itself, asking for answers I did not expect to find. At night, when the world grew quiet, we often sat together by the fountain where we had first seen each other. The water whispered softly, and our voices blended with it, as if the fountain had become a keeper of secrets. Sometimes we spoke about nothing at all. The shifting colors of the sky, the way the moonlight touched the rooftops, yet even in those simple words I felt a closeness that frightened me, because it seemed so fragile, as though a single gust of wind could scatter it. One evening, as the stars began to pierce the darkness, Adrian grew thoughtful. "Do you ever feel," he asked slowly, "that happiness is something the world does not allow us to hold for long?" I looked at him, startled by the sadness in his voice. "Why would you say that?" He lowered his gaze, watching the ripples in the fountain. "Because every time I find something precious, life finds a way to test me, to ask how much I can bear losing." I wanted to answer, to soothe the shadows in his words, but the truth caught in my throat. Instead, I reached out and touched his hand, lightly, almost afraid. He looked up at me then, and though his smile returned, there was a quiet ache in his eyes that never left. That night, when I lay awake listening to the silence of my room, I felt the weight of his question pressing on my heart. For the first time, I realized that love, even in its earliest bloom, carries with it not only joy, but the shadow of what might be lost. Still, I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever storm the future might bring, I could not turn away from him. The thread between us had grown stronger, and I could no longer imagine my days without it. Part 4. Shadows on the Horizon. The summer days stretched longer, filled with warmth and the golden hush of evenings. Adrian and I walked together often now, our steps finding the same rhythm, as though we had been meant to move side by side. We laughed more, we dreamed more, And there were moments when the world seemed to fold itself around us, giving us a secret corner of peace. But shadows have a way of creeping in, even when the light feels eternal. One evening, as we sat beneath the branches of an old oak tree outside the town, Adrian grew quiet. The sky was painted in fading colors, and yet he did not lift his gaze to watch it. His hands were restless, tracing patterns in the grass, and his silence was heavier than words. Finally, he spoke. "I may not always be here," he said softly. The words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and cold. I turned to him, searching his face, but he would not meet my eyes. "What do you mean?" I whispered. He hesitated, as though choosing each word with great care. "Life is complicated for me. There are things I cannot easily explain, things that may take me away, whether I want them to or not." My heart began to race. "Are you leaving?" "No," he said quickly, his hand finding mine, holding it with desperate warmth. "Not now, not by choice. But I need you to understand that I live with uncertainties I cannot control." His voice trembled with something I had not heard before. Fear. Not fear for himself, but for us. I wanted to ask more, to demand the truth he was holding back, but something inside me stopped. Perhaps it was the way his fingers tightened around mine, as though he was clinging to the present moment, begging it not to slip away. So instead of questions, I gave him silence. And in that silence, I leaned against his shoulder, letting him know without words that I would not let go. That night, as I returned home, my heart carried two truths at once, the sweetness of love and the ache of knowing it was already fragile. I realized that what we had was not ordinary. It was delicate, like a glass vessel filled with light, beautiful, but breakable. And as I lay awake in the darkness, I whispered to myself a quiet promise. Whatever storms might come, I would hold on, even if it hurt.